Good morning, readers. Today we are going to talk about perspective. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and get out your reading, learning, intention sheets, write in the date, write in the book that you are reading, which of course should be your historical fiction reading book. Today as a reader, I am working on understanding perspective. Readers, we've been learning so much about history through our historical fiction books, and I've noticed that you have grown a lot as readers and as historians. However, our lesson today about making sure that we understand that one person's perspective is not everyone's perspective. So, it's important to remember that history, as well as your book, is written from one person's perspective. There are other ways of seeing things. Remember, a perspective is a way of seeing things. So it's one person's view of what happened, but there are many people's view of what happened. So when you are reading a book, remember that you are just seeing that event from one person's perspective. It's important, since we know that we avoid overgeneralizations. An overgeneralization is thinking that because one person thought something, or because one thing was a certain way, that everyone is that way, or everyone thinks that. So, when we're reading, one way to avoid overgeneralizations is to ask, who are we really talking about? So, readers, when we are writing our notes or talking in our book clubs, it's really important that we are specific, that we identify exactly who and what we are talking about. I'm going to read you some notes that I have typed up from students' notes that I've read, and these are about Number the Stars. So, if you'll take a peek at the top notes, it says, I noticed these details. So, on page 68, one student said that Anne-Marie talks about not having cream in the city. They get cream in the country. And then that they learned everyone in the country has a lot of cream and butter. They just ate butter all day. In the city, no one had any cream or butter. Because if you remember, at Uncle Henrik's house, it said that they did have cream. Page 77, Uncle Henrik explains that it's better if not everybody knows everything, and that sometimes they have to lie. So this person wrote, everybody lied during the war all the time. It's just all lies, lies, lies. Turn and tell your partner what you're thinking right now. Readers, we should note that the reader that wrote these notes wasn't exactly correct. So, it wasn't that everyone in the country had cream. They just had cream if they had a cow, and they certainly didn't have cream all the time. Just like everyone during the war didn't lie, they left out details when they thought that it would help them. And we don't know that everyone did that. We know that Uncle Henrik and Mama chose not to tell Anne-Marie something. So you'll notice that in the column that says, I learn, there were some overgeneralizations. They assumed that because Uncle Henrik and Mama weren't telling Anne-Marie things, that everyone was lying. And we don't know that that's true, because we've only read about Anne-Marie and Uncle Henrik and Mama in this particular story. Let's continue. I have another example for you. So, they said on page 68, they get cream and butter from Blossom. And this person learned that people in the country who could keep a cow could eat butter, like eating cream and butter. In the city, families like Anne-Marie's, who used to have cream and butter, have now missed it. Turn and tell your partner what you think about this. Readers, I hope you noticed that this student was a lot more specific in what they wrote about the war. They did not overgeneralize. They just said that people that had a cow could eat cream and butter. And now we're going to go to this second one. On page 77, Uncle Henrik explains that it's better if not everybody knows everything, and sometimes people have to lie. This student learned the war made some families careful and tricky, especially with what they told children. So you'll notice that it says some families and it says careful and tricky, but it doesn't say that everyone was lying. So readers, I'm hoping that you're seeing that in this second set of notes, this student was much more specific about who they were talking about than the first student. You need to do this same thing when you're reading. Make sure that you are not overgeneralizing. Readers, we're going to do this same work. I'm going to read you a passage from Number the Stars. It's the part right after Anne-Marie brings the basket to the boat, and then her uncle takes her into the barn and explains what happened. I want you to do the same work that the students did that we just looked at. You're going to write down what you learned from this passage. So you're going to say, I learned, and then you're going to write what you have learned. Be careful not to overgeneralize. You're going to use phrases like people who, and seem to have, and some people. All right. Many of the fishermen have built hidden places in their boats. I have too, down underneath. I have only to lift the boards in the right place, and there is room to hide a few people. Peter and the others in the resistance who work with him bring them to me, and to the other fishermen as well. There are people who hide them and help them along the way to Gilegi. Anne-Marie was startled. Peter is in the resistance? Of course, I should have known. He brings Mama and Papa the secret newspaper, De Freidanks. And he always seems to be on the move. I should have figured it out myself. He is very, very brave, a very, very brave young man, Uncle Henrik said. They all are. Anne-Marie frowned, remembering the empty basket that morning. Were the Rosens and the others all there, then, underneath when I brought the basket? Uncle Henrik nodded. I heard nothing, Anne-Marie said. Of course not. They had to be absolutely quiet for hours. The baby was drugged so that it wouldn't wake and cry. Okay, readers, right now you are going to write what you learned from this passage, and you're going to be sure not to overgeneralize. So you want to use these phrases that I've written down. People who, and then write what you learned, or seem to have and what you learned, or some people, and then write what you learned. Readers, as we are learning history from our historical fiction stories, remember not to overgeneralize. These stories are glimpses into people's lives, but they are just one person's perspective on a situation. So, today you are going to read your historical fiction book. This is our last week for historical fiction. So make sure that you are reading as much as you possibly can. And as you talk or as you read, be sure not to overgeneralize. Let's make it a great reading day.